Good evening and welcome to another Wednesday night in the Word. My name is Carlos Sr. I'm the senior pastor at New Hope in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we're excited to continue our journey through the Old Testament. Each week, we've been featuring a conversation with various Old Testament figures. And we're excited. We have a wonderful person that we're going to invite to the couch tonight, and none other than the person of Queen Esther. Now I should say, just to provide a little bit of a little background to the conversation we want to have tonight. The conversation that we'll have with Esther is really going to center largely around the importance of valuing the obligation, the responsibility that we have to one another in community. There's this idea that's kind of runs through our society, and it's not a new idea. It's not a new concept, but it's an idea that is starting to really not starting has built up a lot of momentum over time, and it's a concept that an increasing number of folks are embracing um, as a healthy way of approaching life. And it's the idea that adult um, satisfaction or adult commitment is the highest, um, or excuse me, that adult fulfillment is the highest or most important thing, right? That our personal fulfillment is the thing that is most important to achieving life satisfaction. It is the thing that is most important to uh, legacy fulfillment. It is the most important as it relates to mental and spiritual and emotional health. That my personal fulfillment, right? Adult fulfillment is the most important value, more important than family, more important than parenting, more important than our romantic relationships, marriage, more important than other what traditionally, historically have been high values, things like loyalty, integrity, commitment. Those things are seen as either antiquated, old ideas designed to ensnare and to limit, and so they are not optimal. Anything that is perceived as an obstacle or a hindrance to personal fulfillment um, is to be either rejected, muted, or neutered. Right? It's either something that wholly does not fit, or if you're kind of on the fence and you know that these things have value, but you don't want them to have more value, or you're in a space where you're not sure if should have as much value as the commitments that you have to your own personal fulfillment. And so you allow them to linger, right? Some of these other values to linger, but not so much so that they would actually require any sort of moral obligation on your part, right? And certainly not consistently. And I think you'll understand, why this is. I think the text, this story that we have in front of us tonight, really does speak, I think, very profoundly to this sort of pathological way of approaching life that many, many, many folks are embracing, both inside and outside of faith and religious community. This idea that the most important thing that I can be focusing on is my own personal fulfillment, right? Adult fulfillment. And and when we look at Queen Esther, this is just such a profound story. And it's Esther, the portions of scripture that we're going to be looking at tonight primarily are Esther chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. But really, we'll look at the whole Esther narrative, and this is occurring during about 486 to 465 BC. Most of the setting is within the context of the Persian court. The king is Ahasuerus or Xerxes, and and it's interesting how this thing plays out. Esther is one of the few books in the Bible where God is not explicitly mentioned once. His name is not necessarily brought up, but yet he is present throughout the story. You could sense him working in and around and through the details. The story kind of opens up. Xerxes is, he's, like a lot of um, of men in that society who were wealthy, um, had more than one wife. Um, but the way that his court was set up is that there tended to be a favored wife among the many, and the favored wife in Xerxes' court, um, there was a falling out, there was a tiff, and so then Xerxes essentially has a beauty pageant to select the next wife. It's kind of like, who's going to get the rose. And it just so happens that there's a young Jewish woman by the name of Esther, who is a part of that court life, a part of that world. And just to give you a little bit of background on Esther, Esther is um, um, an orphan. We don't know exactly what happened to her parents, but we know that her parents are nowhere around. She is raised by a cousin by the name of Mordecai. He is her guardian, her mentor, someone that she can consistently rely on. And so Esther has the opportunity to participate in this beauty pageant. She wins, becomes the next queen, and has this you know wonderful cousin who supports her sort of behind the scenes. He's When you look at the text, he is positioned by the king's gate, and this position that he has in the king's court allows him to kind of see everything. And so right away we see in Esther this figure that is easily relatable. Um, there's so many folks that we know within our circle. Some of you may be listening tonight and may tune in later, who can say, man, yeah, you know already I see some similarities, between my story and Esther's story. Parents nowhere to be found, nowhere around. An extended family member steps in, makes sure that she has the love and support and guidance that she needs. And then, living this young Jewish woman, minority woman, um, part of a marginalized community, essentially ascends to a place of wealth and power, not necessarily because of any intellectual abilities or insight or any other strengths that she would bring to the marketplace, but she is seen as a commodity. She ascends to a place of power and money because of her beauty. Um, and so she gets into the court, and there erupts a crisis. There's a gentleman who's a part of Xerxes' circle, named Haman. Now Haman is, he's a creature of the court. He's a political operative, and like a lot of folks that sort of kind of major in that political space and arena, he has become corrupted. He is arrogant, selfish, and corrupt. And so an incident occurs where Haman comes into contact with Esther, now Queen Esther, her cousin Mordecai, and Mordecai doesn't pay Haman what the due honor that Haman feels like he's worthy of. Mordecai just kind of doesn't really even acknowledge him, and immediately as a result of that, Haman begins to sort of just um, contemplate ways that he can try and undermine Mordecai's position. He begins to develop a hatred for this man, and 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 like any kind of root of bitterness, when it goes unchecked, it can start to really corrupt the entire way that you begin to view another person. And so it starts out with Haman that he feels like he's offended because Mordecai doesn't kiss his ring, doesn't bow down, doesn't give him what he feels like is due respect. And then he begins to associate Mordecai's behavior with being something rooted in race. And and he goes from merely wanting to try to hurt Mordecai to now having this thing that he has against not only Mordecai but anyone that is Jewish. He is the textbook definition of anti-Semitic. Right. The all of the things that are wrong in his life are the result of Mordecai and Jewish people. And so Haman begins to plot ways that he can first harm Mordecai, um, and not knowing, Haman doesn't know that Mordecai and Esther are related, but trying to find ways that he can hurt Mordecai, and beyond his understanding or knowledge, also potentially hurt Esther. Well, Mordecai, Haman uses his influence in the court to get the king to pass a decree that essentially is going to lead to the extermination of all of the Jews. Mordecai gets wind of this. And of course, now Esther is, she's in the upper echelons of court power. And so Mordecai doesn't have access to her. So he sends a message to Esther to make her aware of the peril that her people are in. And of course, Esther, she's off in the palace, has no idea about the intrigue that's developed between Haman and Mordecai, and the fact that there's this decree out here designed to solicit the extermination of all of the Jews. And when she gets this word about the peril that her people are in, it puts her in a conundrum. I want you to think about again kind of where Esther's coming from. Um, she comes from this orphan background. She's someone that probably should have made it. There's nothing in her background, nothing within the context of her family that marks her as someone who will be more than just an ordinary, everyday plug and play person. And maybe even less than that, right? There's nothing in her background or pedigree that says that she will achieve anything that is noteworthy. So many odds stacked against her. And now, she has made it. She has, influence, power, prestige, more money than a person could ever want. Anything that she wants is, within reason, right? Within the reason, within the constraints of the king's court. But and now she's being presented with this situation where she's being asked to jeopardize her station, to jeopardize her position, um, to go in and talk to this king who had a reputation for being a little bit, maybe at times, temperamental. Right, you weren't allowed with Xerxes. You weren't allowed to just show up and pepper him with questions. He just, um, that was a part of what happened with the previous queen, like just the tension between he and her. And so Esther is being asked to do, what is probably one of the most selfless things a person can be asked to do, right? To suspend her own personal fulfillment, right? She is living out her dream. Anything that a person, that a little girl could want or think of, Esther's realized that she is a princess, a living, breathing princess. And Mordecai is saying, um, if you don't do something, if you don't get involved, um, then something very bad can happen, right? Mordecai's conviction, when you read his words, his conviction is that somehow, some way, somebody's going to step up. God isn't going to allow his people to be exterminated. But the words that he says to Esther in chapter 4, verse 14, the B part, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Um, Mordecai, in trying to help Esther make the right decision, right? How do you ask someone to risk their dream, their personal fulfillment, their personal joy for other people, for somebody else? In some ways, for a community that maybe has let her down. Like, where are her parents? Why is it that her cousin had to raise her? Where are her grandparents? Like, where's the this where's the rest of her family? I mean, we don't know. Um, and what kind of other supports did she get from the community? I don't, we don't know those things. Um, but Mordecai frames it for her in a way that I think can be helpful for all of us. And Mordecai, his question, he frames it in, he frames the situation in the form of a question, and he basically asks the question: who's to say that what you have, the position that you're in, the influence that you have, the wealth that is at your disposal, who's to say that these things aren't a part of God's divine prerogative? That the very position that you have, the position you are in, the access that you have been granted, maybe those things weren't given to you, maybe those things weren't provided to you for your own fulfillment, for the realizing merely of your own satisfaction, but maybe those things have been given to you so that you can have historical significance, that your impact, the impact will be greater than your sense of self-satisfaction for a temporary season. I think it's interesting. Sometimes I hesitate, man, to have these kind of direct conversations, especially with women in our community, because women in our community have like given so much. Like, when I think about all that women in our community do to help hold it together, hold families together, make sure children are raised. They stick around when sometimes when men are absent, or when we treat our responsibilities as being kind of optional. It's difficult to ask for more. But you know like Mordecai, we're, I feel like a part of what has been given to me to share tonight, like Mordecai shared with Esther, is that our community is in real peril. We're in real jeopardy. That we're at a critical juncture in our community's history. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're not talking about, that we're not allowed to talk about. I was reading some research the other day, things about like even just sexual orientation, sexual preference, and how that works in community, what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, how it needs to be framed. um, and a lot of it is it's not just that it's foolishness, it's dangerous. We're not able, for example, to have conversations, and say we're not able to, we should be having conversations in our community about the correlation between um, sexual preference, sexual identity, and abandonment in community, abuse in community. That there are studies out there that at least seem to find that there's some correlation between that, the impact that absentee fatherism has in community, right? And we can play around with the words, we can do semantics, and oh, dads are there, they're around, but the vast majority of them are not in the home, and that makes a difference. And they're not homemaking with mom, and that makes a difference. And we're in peril, and we've got a generation, that are out here trying to find themselves, and seem to think that the more full of themselves they are, the closer they are to getting to the real answer of it all. And the more we're gaining ourselves, the more we're losing our community. We're in real peril. There is this sense within the community that, and listen, let me say this, and it's not like it's new, right? It's been there for a while. Like, some of us are the product of it, right? We are what it looks like when your mom and your dad treat parenting like it's optional. When we treat our romantic relationships casually. So we're sliding rather than deciding. Like, that's a lot of what the community looks like. The difference is, there was a period where there was some shame attached to it, some guilt, like the acknowledgement that even if I'm not present, I should be. Like, I mean, I'm out here wilding, doing my thing. Um, but now we're transitioning into this thing where people do this wildly irresponsible, engage in this wildly irresponsible behavior, where we have made self-fulfillment an idol, so that we make choices that ultimately sacrifice things of great importance on the altar of this idol of self-fulfillment. We'll sacrifice family, we'll sacrifice kids, um, integrity, character. And it's crazy, because one of the other things that's different, like I said, it's always been around, but one of the other things that's different is the internet, right? And so um, we engage as this whole idea of self-fulfillment being sort of the ideal and the highest value, or right up there, with the others. Um, that like what the internet does is it then also offers this court that will provide you instant gratification no matter what choice or decision you make. Like you can see people post the craziest things online, like the craziest, nuttiest things online. And there's always at least 6 or 7 people that will co-sign it. That alone ought to give you pause. That alone, if nothing else, ought to let you know that the internet is not the place to go and and look for a cosign. It's too easy. It's too easy. There's always somebody online who they don't care about the context. They don't care about, what's actually going on when you're posting what you're posting. You can post whatever you want to post, and they're going to read into it based on their own situation. There's no critical thinking involved. There's no research. Some cases they just hitting the like button because the last time y'all hung out, y'all had a good experience. And it's toxic because we'll engage in this behavior that is rooted in the need for self fulfillment, right? That the highest value is adult fulfillment. And and then you got a whole Jesus out here saying, look, the more you gain, the more you fight to get your life, the more of your life you're losing. But the more you give your life away, the more of your life you'll actually gain. So, so Mordecai frames this thing for Esther. Maybe what you've been given, maybe these superpowers that you've been given, these powers to connect and engage, this platform, these resources, maybe the things that you've been given, the access that you've been allowed, the favor that you walk in, the grace that is on your life. Maybe it's it's not so that those things can end terminally in you. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe those things haven't been given to you so that you can decide how you want to use them. Maybe God, maybe the creator, maybe the most high has given those things to you for a very specific reason, and maybe that reason is attached to the real peril that our people are in now. And what that looks like. And so Mordecai, he hits, he frames that thing for Esther just right. And Esther, to her credit, she gives it some thought, gives it consideration. As a part of that whole process, she calls for a time of prayer and fasting, um, for herself and for her community. And essentially, with this prayer and fasting that she calls for, it is her way of acknowledging that, God, um, I need you. It's I am sitting at a pivotal moment in human history, and certainly in the history of my people. Um, my choices, my decisions are going to have generational impact. Like the things that I'm doing now will echo, we could say, we could say echo throughout history. Because I mean, we're talking about Esther now, several thousand years after the events of this story. But certainly in the short term, and the families that are in that community and the subsequent generations that will come behind them, they are going to all be directly impacted by the kind of leadership that Esther shows or doesn't show. And when you recognize, the kind of weight of responsibility that you carry in that regard, I hope that you know, I hope that it does solicit that you look up and not just in and not around, right? There's so much of looking inward and looking around that we see happening in the culture. Looking around to see how other people are responding and what they're doing, looking inwardly and trying to gauge how we maybe should respond based on how we feel. The only problem with feelings is that, as Elder Barry Brown would say, is that they are inconsistent and unreliable. And what Esther does is Esther looks up. Any decision that I make based on how I feel is going to be rooted in the terrestrial. It's going to be rooted in time. It's going to be rooted in a particular place and circumstance. Any decision that I make looking around is going to be rooted in culture, fads. What is the popular philosophical ideas of the day? Esther looks up. I need guidance from an authority um, above my own, an authority above all of the authorities that are around me. And she looks up, she prays, she asks God for guidance. And we believe that God gives her that guidance because we see how she chooses to move. Number one, she makes a commitment. She makes a commitment to her community. She makes a commitment to her family. And her response to Mordecai is like this: if I die, I die. There are certain things that are worth laying it all on the line for. And you and I, we have to be clear about what those things are because our circumstances are always evolving. Our situation is always evolving. You are changing. Your body's changing. How much how much you made this year, maybe changed from last year. Access and opportunities constantly evolving and changing. And it's important that you and I know what things need to be constant. What is your North Star? What are your guiding principles? What are the things the principles that you want to take with you throughout the course of your life, so that as seasons change, as weather changes, as relationships change, as opportunities change, you have an internal, is an old school term that I want to use for, but it won't come to me right now. But an internal um, value system that allows you to maintain a certain level of character, that allows you to walk with a certain level of integrity, no matter what room you're in, no matter what season of life you're in, no matter what opportunity you're navigating. How important is loyalty to you? How important is it to you to be responsible, to be reliable, to be accountable? Where does family land on your scale of values? And so when and then Mordecai, the other thing that Mordecai says to Esther is this, and he's like, "Look, man, and, because one way, I forgot to say this. I got to double back real quick. He's like, and don't get it twisted. Don't assume that because you are, ascending, that you can, kind of forget what's happening to the rest of us, back here, as if what's happening to us won't somehow impact you. The very things that we sacrifice on the altar of self-indulgence and self-fulfillment often become the things that hurt us later in life, whether it's relationships, legacy. And that's why it's important for us to have a consistent set of values that's guiding us through all four quarters of the game, whether it's the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, because sometimes, we uh you know when you're making decisions and choices based on the circumstance or the season, it's not always the best indicator of what you're going to need in the next season. So stuff that you may be throwing out, and that stuff that you're neglecting in summer, because I don't need this, and then you look up and fall is here, then winter, and you got all of this stuff. You chucked all of your coats and stuff because you didn't need that stuff in winter. I mean, you didn't need that stuff in summer. Anyway, so Esther leans in, and we see the hand of God on her life. She begins to move very strategically. She doesn't, approach Xerxes full on, not right away, but instead she uses her influence to get to have a dinner with him. She says, she comes into Xerxes' presence. He's what would you like? Anything you want. And she says, I want to have dinner, and I want you to invite Haman. This seems like a strange thing, but this is one of those instances where you keep your friends close, your enemies closer. And so she has Haman come, and then um, Haman comes. Haman's completely oblivious to what's going on. He feels honored that the queen has requested him for dinner. And that's the thing about when you are, when you're just mean and underhanded in dealing with other people. You just never know. It's always the right time to do the right thing, even when it's people that maybe you have, um, I don't know, whatever negative feelings towards. Sometimes we can develop and harbor these negative feelings about people, and it's just rooted in our own struggles and challenges and issues, and it really has nothing to do with them. And so it's important to tread lightly. The traps that we set for other people end up being traps that ensnare us. Here it is, Haman, hating on Mordecai with no idea that Esther is Mordecai's cousin. No idea. And he's trying to line Mordecai up for the fade. He done had gallows built to get this man hung, and so Esther, invites him to dinner. They hang out, they have a good time, at least as far as Haman is concerned. And then they come, and then they have a second dinner. Now in between dinners, look how God works. Xerxes, the king, remembers an instance where Mordecai, Esther's cousin, had saved his life, had done him a solid. And so When they get ready to go have the second dinner, Mordecai, as King Xerxes makes Haman to honor Mordecai, which of course drives Haman crazy. Um, but it's like the more Haman tries to undermine and do dirt to this brother, it's like the more his situation becomes um, just intolerable. You know, he spends all of that time trying to destroy somebody else, only for it to backfire. What a waste of time it is to hate on people. What a waste of time it is to put that kind of negative energy into trying to undermine someone else's position. Um, you know, when you serve a God who is just, God is taking care of Mordecai and Esther. Esther and Mordecai, you know, are being proactive and they're doing the things that they need to do so that they can position themselves for God to move. But the one thing that Mordecai isn't doing is we don't see Mordecai going back and forth with Haman or trying to do Haman harm or any of that. He simply um, works in cooperation with his cousin Esther to advocate on their own behalf. And so by the time they come to the second dinner, Esther's there, Haman's there, King Xerxes there. And then at that point, Esther lets it be known that the actions that Haman has been taking has imperiled her life and the life of all the Jews in that kingdom. And at that point, Xerxes has Haman executed on the very gallows that Haman had set up for Mordecai. There's so many, I think, life lessons that we can glean from that. If you and I want to be, if we have a desire to be on the right side of history, just remember that God chooses to make his dwelling among um, the least, the lost, the left behind of those who love him and love his appearing. That his heart is with his people. And Esther, God bless her, uses the God given opportunity that she has in an effort to uplift her people. She does it at great peril to herself, great risk to her position. Um, but she understood that there are some things, there's some values that supersede whatever other little self-interest might be pulling and nagging at us. I want to encourage you in this season where, and I guess especially in this season as I close, right? Like Christmas in so many ways has become a microcosm of so much that's wrong with society, so much that's wrong with culture, right? That this this season that ought to center on family and and the beauty of giving has really become about getting and consuming and the centering of self and what I want and level set yourself. Fight this. Fight, it is maybe up an uphill fight. It is you're definitely fighting this. You're swimming against, um, you're going against the grain. You're swimming upstream, but your soul depends on it. And so many of the people that are attached to you, the outcomes that they experience are directly tied to your ability to win in this arena. There's so much privilege that I've enjoyed in my life because of what it looked like to be raised by two parents. Not saying they were perfect, not saying they didn't have issues or challenges, but I'm saying two parents, who found a way to balance out the needs of their family and their own personal needs. There's so much that I growing up was able to glean from them by watching them struggle in the balance, struggle with, things they want to do, places they want to be, things, and reeling those things in so that those things aren't our God, right? My feelings aren't God. Self-fulfillment is not the highest and best use of my life and time, but that all of those things are subjected to this to are in submission to the ultimate mission that I'm on, which is to glorify God, and that all I do is unto the glory of God. And so what does that look like in the context of my marriage and raising my kids and being in community? So many of you, when you think about some of the most impactful relationships that you've had in your life, it was people, whether it's an auntie or like Mordecai, a cousin, a sibling, someone who stepped up. And when they could have been focused on self fulfillment, what I want, when I want, how I want, instead, they saw that their best and highest use was in service to something that was transcendent. And so they showed up for you when it wasn't convenient, when maybe it really wasn't even their responsibility. And I don't know what this society is going to do when words like duty and commitment and loyalty, like when things like that are considered passe, antiquated, old school. And so I don't know where society is going to go with this. I don't see I don't it's not going to be anything pleasant. It's just not. Like you could just play that movie to its logical conclusion. What does it look like when you live in a society or in a culture where the vast majority of folks, um you know approach life as if self-fulfillment is really the best and highest use of their time and their gifts. We see some of what it looks like already. It's just going to get worse. But what as for me in my house, though, as for me in my house, I you know I I'm at a point now I can't rack my brain about it. I can't continue to lose sleep and be stressed out about folks that are getting kind of caught up in the winds of that. Right, it bled over even into our theology and the doctrine of the church, name it and claim it, and prosperity ministry, and all of that stuff that bled over into our theology, prosperity ministry, name it and claim it. You see a lot of that has died off. You don't hear much about that anymore. But all of that rooted again in this undercurrent philosophical idea, the schematic of self fulfillment being the um, you know the ultimate realization of joy, and you know heartbreaking, devastating. What it does to relationships, families, children, devastating. But so much of it we have to leave in the hands of God. We have to pray for one another. We have to encourage one another to strive towards values that are rooted in something beyond the stuff that we're handed by the culture. That it promises water, but these are, as Scripture says, these are broken cisterns that can hold no water, satisfy no thirst. Um, we have to pray for one another, encourage one another in the truth. Um, do your best. Do your best to stay focused. Don't look to the right or the left. Hide these words of the Lord in your heart that you might not sin against Him. Keep yourself blameless and spotless before the world. Wear anything that you have in this life as a loose garment. Um, keep your eyes on the Lord. Keep your eyes on the Lord. But listen, we're gonna stop there. We're gonna stop there. Any questions? Anybody got any questions tonight? Let's open up the floor for any questions before we get out of here. Any questions? Anybody got any questions? You could toss your questions in the chat if you have any questions. Good to see. Hey Barbara. Hey Jess. Hey Laura. Good to see y'all. Any comments? Yeah, man. It's tough. It's tough. I'll say it can be tough. If you don't like if you haven't taken the opportunity to do your own inventory, like really sit down and like what is, what are the things that are most important to me? What are the values that I'm striving to live out? You don't want to be figuring, don't try to figure those things out as you're going along, or look to the world and the culture to give those things to you. You can be out here and people will pat you on the back and make you think you're winning, and in the meantime, in the eyes of the Lord, you're a whole fool. What if the person who step up caused pain? So what if the person who stepped up caused pain? That's a good question, Laura. There's a lot of folks in our community. We have these complicated relationships with our caregivers. The auntie, that took you in, but cussed you out and all the time and told you wasn't gonna be nobody, wasn't gonna be nothing. Um, why, we it is difficult. The thing I would say to you is it's a couple different things, right? Number one, just know that when those things happen, it's not your fault. It's one of the things that um, because sometimes, especially like when children are in those situations, children in their innocence, they will internalize that abuse. They will come away from it feeling like, they deserve to be treated that way because somehow maybe they were damaged or what, or um, like the old Baldwin quote, when something is done to you well enough, long enough, you begin to do it to yourself. Right. And so when you have these people that, um, these people that were supposed to take care of you, they demonstrate, they show you, they model for you um, how you ought to see yourself, how you ought to be treated. And when you have not been treated well, and when they have not seen your real value. They've not seen your worth. Shaking that off um, can sometimes be a lifetime proposition. Like it can take a lifetime to shake some of that stuff off. But know this, it's not your fault. When you're dealing with broken people and broken and hurting people, they hurt and they break things, they break other people. It's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. Being able to name it, identify it, call it for what it is, that's one step. Yeah, yeah, right. In therapy, right. Yeah, so when you're working through that kind of deep hurt, therapy, I think, is a valuable tool. It is one tool, right? It's not a silver bullet, but being able to sit down with a consistent therapist, um, who themselves have integrity and character and can kind of help walk you through, the trauma related with those events is very key. Um, Beyond that, even the identity that you and I receive in Christ and the exploration of that identity, who we are in Him, and embracing it, learning it, being fully immersed in that also offers a kind of healing. The therapy is good, especially when we talk about, you know, um, being able to name things, work through certain things, in terms of thoughts and concepts, and maybe embedded in our circuitry. But in terms of that new birth, that new identity, that sense of renewal, um, there's nothing like um, the rebirth that occurs through our relationship with Christ. And so it's that combination of things. It's also finding your family. Sometimes our family is the family that God wants us to have is a tapestry. It's like them old quilts that old, my grandmother and others, I would see them make them quilts, taking different patches and weaving them together. Um, I believe when we're following God, that's kind of what our family ends up looking like when we begin to come to the end of our own earthly journey, is that it becomes a patchwork of many different people and many other families. And so it ends up being maybe some of the folks that were part of your biological family, but it ends up being folks that you maybe connect with, you know, other believers are at work or at church, in the neighborhood. Um, but it is being sensitive, having your eyes and your ears open for what who my people are, and God works through all of that. A good therapist, good church home, good church family, friends, a good pastor, um, and doing your own work of growth. Being committed to your own growth, not allowing the things that have happened, um, in the past to prevent us from healing and having the best possible future that we can have in Christ. It's a good question. Good question. Listen, I love y'all. Um, Good to spend some time with you. My prayer is that this is a season of renewal, rest, recovery for you. If you have it to do it, get out, take a walk. The weather's gorgeous. You might have to bundle up a little bit, but it's gorgeous out here. Walk, get out in nature. If you can, stay out of those stores. Um, but just get outside, breathe some of this air, Go do some free stuff. Go look at the lights. Take the kids to the park. Um, you know, have some, have some cocoa. Keep it light. Keep it light. Um, and find ways to have new traditions. Connect, engage. All right. We love you. God bless. Have a good night.